This is a tier list video for what was the greatest fight of the year 2022 in the UFC. There are so many candidates that I'm going to need this tier list. S tier has room for only one fight, and that will be the greatest fight of the year, in my opinion. I'll save that until the end of the video. But I've got all of the great fights of the year hidden around the perimeter of the screen. I'll slowly reveal them one by one as the video goes on and place them where they belong on the tier list. A tier is for like all-out wars. D tier is for like good fights that are a little bit overrated in my opinion, that people call absolutely amazing fights but maybe weren't so great in hindsight and are at the bottom of the list. But they're still really good fights nevertheless because they are on a tier list for the greatest fights of the year. So they're in the conversation at least. Let's start straight away. Let's get into it with Stephen Thompson versus Kevin Holland. This was a great fight. A really, really good fight. I'm going to put it at B tier. I really enjoyed this one. There was back and forth. There was like drama in the fight as well. Like, I think something that makes fights a little bit better than maybe they actually are is like antics within the fight. Like Kevin Holland just sort of like accepting blows against a cage. And there was moments where he would end up on top and then just stand back up and stuff like that. And they were talking to each other in the middle of the fight as well. That makes a fight more fun. However, I am going to put it at B tier. It was a very, very good fight this year. A really enjoyable fight because other fights that are on this tier list, they're landing punches, they're landing jabs on each other for like a duration of the fight and stuff like that. But in this fight, Wonderboy was landing wheel kicks the same way another fighter would be landing right hands. This was a crazy fight. Holland hurt Wonderboy on a few occasions, really badly in the first round as well. So there was drama in both directions, but yeah, it just can't really get to that A tier level because it didn't go all 5 rounds. Holland got injured and wasn't really competitive as the fight went on, but really, really good fight this year. We move on to another fight, which was Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje. I'm going to put this at C tier. There is going to be some kind of deduction process here in terms of points for fight of the year if it's a very quick fight. I'm going to be honest with you guys. This was a first round fight. It ended in the first round. Charles Oliveira got the rear naked choke, but I think this needs to be mentioned because as long as this fight lasted, it was chaos. Absolute chaos. Charles Oliveira, no joke, 5 seconds into the fight had rocked Gaethje with a right hand over the top. And he was clinching up with him, kneeing him to the body. And then Gaethje was swinging back and tagging Oliveira on the chin. Oliveira got dropped once early on in the fight, but was still pressing forward the entire time, landing shots in the clinch, landing good shots of his own. And then Gaethje started landing some really big shots on Oliveira. Of course, dropping him eventually in the first round. And then, of course, he got clipped again. And he threw the teep out there and just sort of like fell back on himself to the ground because he was hurt. And then he ended up pulling guard at one moment and Gaethje's arm was in danger. So this was a really, really good fight. Eventually, of course, Oliveira getting back up, dropping Gaethje, which was just so crazy at the time because he'd just been hurt twice, and then putting him away with a rear naked choke in the first round. This was absolute craziness because it was just non-stop action, start to finish. However, I can't put it too high up because there was so little of it. You know what I mean? If that was how the fight went for 2 or 3 rounds, I'm putting it at A tier. But I'm going to put it at C tier for now. We move on to another fight that's on the tier list, which is Drew Dober versus Terrence McKinney. Again, I'm putting it at D tier because it was a crazy fight, but it was so quick. It was over before you knew it. And also, Terrence McKinney, I know he took the fight on very short notice, but he didn't really have the cardio or grit to make it a really fun fight because it was like he hurt Drew Dober once or twice early on in like a crazy scrap of a fight. And then there was a moment where they sort of, McKinney just ended up on top position for a bit, just sort of like trying to get his breath back. And then Dober got back up. And then when Dober started to make the fight entertaining himself, McKinney just folded immediately and just huddled up on the ground and accepted defeat pretty much after a big knee to the face. So it was a great fight. It was like 2 minutes of chaos, but it wasn't enough to put higher up on the tier list compared to some of the other ones. I need some duration. You know what I mean? I need to be enjoying it and going crazy for about like 20 minutes of the fight, just back and forth, non-stop chaos. So Drew Dober, Terrence McKinney's going to be at D tier. We move on to another fight on this list, which is Nate Landwehr versus David Onama. Again, antics is what I'm talking about. I'm putting it a B tier. There's some really good fights this year that people don't quite remember, but I'm putting it at B tier. This was absolutely crazy. An absolutely crazy fight. Mainly because of Nate Landwehr making it such a crazy fight, because I feel like he could have finished Onama earlier on in the second round. Of course, Onama almost finished him in the first round as well. But there was like moments when Landwehr would literally stand back up and let Onama back into the fight and gesture towards the camera and the crowd and flex and scream in his face and stuff like that. So this was absolute craziness, but a lot of people don't remember that it wasn't just straight Nate Landwehr after the first round. Like, there was a bit of a crazy first round. Onama dropped him. Landwehr came back and actually blocked Onama at the end of the round with an elbow in the clinch and a big knee to the body. But then in round two, sure, that Landwehr was doing good and dominating. It looked like it was over for Onama, but there was always moments where Onama would tag him with something, and all of a sudden it's time for Onama to have a chance. And Landwehr's backing up and trying to roll with shots and find his way back into safety, but then he would sort of get back in there, go for a submission, start beating up Onama on the ground. And then, of course, all the antics to the crowd. But then even in round three, Nate Landwehr's dominating the round, destroying Onama, mocking him, getting back up, letting Onama back up, gesturing to the crowd. The crowd's going crazy. And then at the end of round three, Onama tags him and hurts him at one moment. And then another moment at the end of round three, he kind of drops him at the end of round three as well, which was absolutely crazy. So it was just like so fun to watch. And even though Landwehr was winning the majority of it, there was always something back from David Onama. You know what I mean? Where he would make it crazy in his benefit. So it's got to be at B tier. We move on to another fight, which is Marlon Vera versus Rob Font. You know what? I'm putting it at A tier. I was going absolutely crazy during this fight when I watched it live. And it doesn't get enough credit for Fight of the Year, in my opinion. The numbers they put on each other. Like, I think Rob Font was landing like at least 40 shots around minimum on Marlon Vera. But I think he had some rounds where he was landing 50, 60 significant strikes on Marlon Vera. And Vera was in the fight, don't get me wrong, but he was getting beaten up pretty badly by Rob Font for the majority of the fight. But there was literally like 3 moments or 4 moments, like in the second, third, fourth, and fifth round, where Vera would just do something absolutely crazy to Rob Font. I think he dropped him with a left hand in round 2. I'm not even joking. I'm pretty sure he sweet chin musicked him in round 4 at some point. I think he landed a front kick on him at one point as well, dropped him with another big shot, and then started beating him up on the ground. It was just, you couldn't stop watching. And the best part about this that I think separates it from Wonderboy versus Holland and Onama versus Landwehr is the fact that this went 5 rounds, all out action. And during like Wonderboy versus Holland, there was like moments where it would sort of like die down a bit. Even in Nate Landwehr versus Onama, Onama wasn't in it the whole time. He was just sort of like the punching bag for a majority of it, where both of these guys were in it the whole time. Even though Rob Font was winning the majority of the fight, as I said, it was non-stop action. And even though Font was winning, Vera was always throwing back. He was just getting outdone. But then he would do something crazy, like every round other than round 1, that just made you lose your mind. It was mental. So I'm putting it at A tier. I think it's one of the top 5 fights of the year for sure. We move on to another fight, which is Figueiredo versus Moreno 3. I'm putting it at C tier. I'll be honest, it did have some lulls in the action. There were some moments where it was like, okay, this is a bit of a slower round. But then there were those moments where Figueiredo dropped him in round 3 and had the Dash choke. I think Moreno wobbled him in one of the rounds 2 or 4 as well. And then in round 5, Figueiredo dropped Moreno again, but Moreno had him wobbled at one moment in round 5 as well. So it was just, there were some crazy moments. However, the reason why I'm not putting it as high up as B tier or A tier is because like round 1 was just, you know, Figueiredo leg kicking and just outdoing Moreno a little bit. Round 2 was like a bit of back and forth, but nothing too crazy, but Moreno got the better of it. And round 3 was kind of good, and then there was the moment where he dropped him that was crazy, and it just wasn't the all-out chaos and back and forth craziness of like some of the other fights. And there were no wheel kicks from Wonderboy over and over again at any moment in the fight either. So although it was good, Figueiredo Moreno 1 was better. You know what I mean? And that just goes to show. So I'll put this at C tier. Very, very good fight at C tier, but there were too many moments where they were just sort of staring at each other for like 2-minute periods in the fight, where these fights, there was no lull in the action to that extent. We move on to another fight on the tier list, which is Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot. Amazing grappling fight. Amazing grappling fight. And for a heavily, predominantly grappling fight, the fact that it's made its way onto a fight of the year tier list, it just shows how good the grappling was in that fight, because these two were just scrambling all over the place. And it was so good. I think this really put grappling on the map for a lot of people. Like a lot of people that don't appreciate grappling in MMA, that was a fight where it doesn't matter who you are. If you're a boxing fan, like coming over to watch MMA for the first time, and that's your example of grappling, that's what you get to see of grappling in MMA. That was like an example of like, oh, I can get behind this. You know what I mean? This is really fun to watch. They're scrambling all over the place. Mateusz Gamrot's hitting Granby roll after Granby roll and eventually getting the better of the grappling. And there were some good moments on the feet, of course. Tsarukyan clipping him with a spinning back fist, also catching him with those switch kicks to the body over and over again. And then Mateusz Gamrot was landing some really good boxing combos, and whilst Tsarukyan was in on a single leg, he was punching him in the face over and over. Caught him with a massive right hand, I believe, in round 3 as well. So, crazy fight, but because heavy grappling, no real moments where they were dropping each other back and forth or scrapping in the pocket like madmen, we're putting it a D tier. But it's part of the conversation for sure. We move on to another fight this year, which was Luke Rockhold versus Paulo Costa. Now, people think this one should be a bit higher, but I'm going to put it at D tier because when you really watch it back, fair play, it was to do with the elevation, and a lot of fighters got tired on that card, other than Usman, who prepared for it because he fights at Team Elevation, and they train at Elevation, clues in the name. A lot of fighters gassed out on the card, and although it was fun, and there were moments where Luke Rockhold would rub his blood in the face of Paulo Costa, and other moments like that where Rockhold would scream at him some kind of expletive and then land a big shot in round 2. There were a lot of moments where it did just get a bit dead because they were exhausted, and it became sort of like, why is Costa not taking advantage? Rockhold's got his hands on his knees. He's completely out of breath. Costa's not sort of putting the pressure on the way he needs to here. And there was a lot of moments where they were just sort of staring at each other for like a minute long, and then it got back to the action afterwards. So although it is a part of one of the greatest fights of the year, it's like top 20, top 25, however many are going to be in this video, it's lower down. Yeah, I mean, because it was crazy. I just think people were surprised to see Rockhold scrap the way he did, and some of the antics made it a little bit more interesting, whereas in round 3 it was like Costa just has the back for a while, and Costa's on top position for like 2 minutes, not really doing anything, and there were a lot of moments like that where they were just sort of staring at each other as well. So, yeah, I'm going to put it at D tier. We move on to another fight that took place this year that was Calvin Kattar versus Giga Chikadze. Underrated one to start off the year, the very first card of the year, main event. I think people, they see this because I think there was like a general resentment of Giga Chikadze because he was talking smack on Holloway, talking smack on the Korean Zombie and stuff like that. So people really wanted to see that hype train get derailed. So when they remember this fight, they see it as the night that Calvin Kattar beat up Giga Chikadze. When you really watch back the fight, it wasn't that at all. This was the night that Giga Chikadze and Calvin Kattar went to war with each other. Now, it's not going to be at B tier or A tier because in round 1 it was just sort of like nothing, and then Kattar found his moment, ended up on top position, and just sort of kept that position for the rest of the round for about 3.5 minutes or something along those lines. So that does hold it back from being B or A tier. But in rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5, they were scrapping it out with each other. Round 5, you saw Kattar really start to get the better of Giga Chikadze and land those elbows a bit more and just basically start spamming nothing but elbows, like exclusively elbow attacks on Giga Chikadze, which was crazy, and he kind of knocked him down at the end of round 5 and made it a great finish of a fight. But in rounds 2, 3, and 4, they were scrapping back and forth. Giga Chikadze was given as good as he took, but Kattar was the one taking the shots a bit better, pushing him backwards, landing a few of the better shots per round. But both guys were landing amazing shots on each other. And I know a lot of people hated on Chikedzi and lol, hype train derailed. What were you saying about Holloway and Volk and all this type of stuff? Because he was saying Volk's scared of him and stuff. But I think I was surprised by Giga Chikedzi's chin in that fight. I left that fight thinking, man, Giga's tough. And I didn't think he would be. So, very good scrap between the two of them. I'm putting it at C tier. We move on to another fight, which was Steven Peterson versus Julian Erosa. Mental. A mental fight this was. And this is above Holland versus Thompson, above Nate Landwehr versus David Onama. This was a mental fight. You need to go back and watch this fight. They were all out, slugging it out with each other. And it was very low skill level. I am going to say that. But that's what made it so fun. You know what I mean? It was just like both of them eating shots. And almost more than wanting to win against each other, they were kind of just wanting to prove that they had the better chin than the other guy almost. Like there were moments where in the third round, Erosa was doing the better work and he was landing the better shots and he would score a takedown every round just to sort of like tilt the odds in his favor. But Peterson would get right back up. He would crank on a guillotine. He'd have a moment where he almost had like a submission off of his back and stuff like that. But Erosa would have moments where he's just walking down Peterson like Hooker was walking down Poirier in their fight with his hands by his waist, and Peterson would just land these massive shots and Erosa would just take him like nothing. Keep walking forward, wobbled over this way at one point, but then he would rock Peterson back afterwards. It just got crazier as the fight went on, and it was mental. It was an absolutely mental fight. So you need to watch this fight if you haven't already, because it kind of flies under the radar. Not a lot of people are talking about it, but it really was, like, I don't know, it almost takes the top spot for me. I think it was better than Font versus Vera, but it really was just a crazy fight of them just scrapping back and forth. So check it out if you haven't already. I'm putting it at A tier. We move on to another fight that took place this year, which was Suma Dwerji versus Matt Schnell. I was debating whether or not to put this at C tier or B tier, but watching it back, there were multiple comeback moments for Matt Schnell. It wasn't just that moment that everyone remembers in the third round where he was landing the elbows on top and then he got the inverted triangle rolled to his back and started landing elbows there as well, and it looked like Dwerji might have, passed over to the other side for a second. It was more like Dwerji was rocking him so badly, but there was another moment in round 2. This is at the bottom of B tier. I'm just going to point out. This isn't as good as Onama Landwehr or Wonderboy versus Holland. But there were moments where in round 2, I think Matt Schnell had another comeback moment where he got a takedown and he was landing big shots. But the amount of times that Dwerji was just landing vicious blows on Matt Schnell early on in that fight, that's what made it such a good fight. It can't get A tier or even too high up on B tier, because it was just like, there wasn't enough of it. You know what I mean? There were just short moments of craziness, and it wasn't like a constant craziness. So I'm almost considering putting it at C tier, but the craziness that happened was so crazy that I have to put it a bit higher up than some of the ones at C tier. It was just mental. Suma Dwerji was teeing off on him, landing like, he was like manipulating the guard with his arm and sliding elbows in. It was just, it was a crazy scrap. If it was like a 3-rounder where there was another round of it, or there was just like more consistent action throughout the fight, it might have been at A tier, but I'm going to put it at the bottom of B tier for now. Crazy fight this year. We move on to another fight that was Cyril Gane versus Taito Ivasa. You know what? For fight of the year status, I'm putting it at C tier. I am, because it wasn't that. I think the craziness was, it was one-sided early on to Cyril Gane. He was just landing his little tapping shots at range onto Ivasa. And to me, you can't have a dead round in a fight of the year conversation. I know people are going to hate me putting this at C tier. It's probably the best fight at C tier. So I'm going to move some things along while I talk here. It's probably the best fight at C tier, so I will give it that. You can't have a dead round of action in a fight of the year conversation and expect me to put you at fight of the year. That's just not possible. Okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm not putting you at fight of the year if you have a whole first round of not much going on. And even round 3, it was crazy, but Tuivasa didn't really have too many moments in round 3, and he got finished. So he did have a moment where he faked the wobble and then swung a shot back that was crazy, but round 2 was maybe round of the year. I'll give it that. Round 2 of Cyril Gane versus Tai Tuivasa could be up there with round of the year. Okay, it really could. Like, it will be up there with maybe Oliveira versus Gaethje for round of the year. But in terms of fight of the year, I need a little bit more zest than that. You know what I mean? I need something more than just that amazing round 2. But it was crazy. Tuivasa dropped him out of nowhere. No one expected it. And then Gane came back and just scrapped for once, which is something you rarely see out of Cyril Gane. So I think it was more like people overstated how crazy the entire fight was because we were either expecting a boring schooling from Cyril Gane or Tuivasa to land one shot and it would be over. And we got something way crazier. So there's a lot of fights on this list where you know it was going to be crazy. You know what I mean? We move on to another fight that took place this year that was Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. I'm putting it a D tier. I think it was a great fight. It was a very fun fight. Just like I think Armand Saruki and Mateus Gamrot was fun. Drew Dober, Terrence McKinney was fun. Paulo Costa, Luke Rockhold was fun as well. But round 1 was like, I think it was like there's so much on the line in the fight that we overstate how good it was, to be honest with you. That's what I feel like it was like. Like, there was so much on the line going into it that it was like anything that happened would be like, oh, he landed a jab. You know what I mean? But when you watch back the fight, round 2 was crazy. A crazy, crazy round, which is why it's on this list. O'Malley hurting Yan for a second, having him off balance. And then Yan hurting O'Malley badly and winning the rest of that round. But round 1, there were a lot of moments where it just sort of fell short of action. Like, they were going back and forth on the feet for a bit. And then Yan would get a takedown. And then O'Malley would just be putting his fingers in the gloves and cheating the whole time. And Yan would just be a frustrated guy on top, just sort of like laying there for 30 seconds of control time, a minute of control time without really getting off too much damage because of O'Malley's blatant and fucking terrible cheating that he constantly did that no one called him out for but me. But yeah, that's something that happened in that fight. Round 3 as well, it would get fun with O'Malley landing that big knee and landing good shots. But then there would be a moment where Yan would just be on top position, not being able to get off damage because O'Malley's cheating again, putting his fingers in the gloves, eye poking Yan, hooking the cage as well to keep him upright. So there were just too many moments of a lull in action, but it was a great fight overall. Entertaining first round, entertaining third round. Second round was great, but I just need a bit more of constant entertainment. It's almost identical to Rockhold versus Costa, in all honesty. There were crazy moments, and then in between it, there was just some lulls in action. We move on to another fight that took place on this card, which was Priscilla Cachoeira versus Yi Yeon Kim. I'm putting it at A tier, you know. I give female MMA fights a load of shit. I know I do. People don't remember this. This was a crazy fight. Round 1 was... It was alright. It was a good, solid round of fighting. It was just a good round of fighting. Not too crazy. Round 2, it started to get really, really fun. But round 3 of that fight might actually be round of the year. It might be. It was actually fucking... I rewatched it. It was fucking crazy. I think Yi Yeon Kim... I want to say it was like 80-60 or 60-50. I don't know what it was, but I'm almost thinking of the number 80 when it comes to Yi Yeon Kim's significant strikes in that round. It was just Cachoeira crashing forwards. Yi Yeon Kim just destroying her on the back foot. But Cachoeira still cracking back every now and again and making it really fun. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of A tier. This is the worst A tier fight of the year. But it was so, so good. I have to put it at A tier. Because it was just one of those fights where you're like, oh, I might even skip this one. You know what I mean? Like, it was one of them types of fights where you're like, yeah, might as well skip it. You know, it's on the prelims. I think it might have been on early on the main card, actually, never mind. But it's just one of those fights where you're like, yeah, whatever. But then when you actually sat there and watched it, I was like, oh my God, this is a war. This is a fight of the year candidate. And it was just crazy. Round 3 was genuinely one of the greatest rounds, probably the greatest round in women's MMA history. And up there with just greatest rounds ever anyway. Round 3 was so ridiculous. Yi Yong Kim got robbed, and I should have put it in my robbery video, but I didn't think of it then. But for this, I definitely thought of it, and it was absolutely mental. So I'm putting it at A tier. At the bottom of A tier, but at A tier nevertheless. Really, really good fight. Great performance from both. We move on. Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. I'm putting it at B tier, but I'll put it at the start of B tier. The top of B tier for Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. Really, really fun fight. No, like, round 1 was eh. You know what I mean? Because there was a moment where they kind of like neutralized each other on the ground a little bit, and Khamzat was just kind of holding on to him against a cage, and Burns was just sort of like not letting him get what he wanted. And there were a few minutes of staleness in round 1 that sort of stops it from being A tier. But other than that, it was crazy. However, it was the stakes of the fight that made you more emotionally invested in it. You know what I mean? Like Chimaev getting dropped in round 2. If that was any other fighter, you know, that happened all but one of the rounds out of 5 in Marlon Vera versus Rob Font. But because it was Chimaev getting dropped off balance for a second, it was like, oh my fucking, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen, you know? But when you take away the bias and you just look at it as a general fight, it was just a really, really great fight. Was it the best fight of the year? No, but it was absolutely mental. Khamzat Chimaev, Gilbert Burns. Chimaev drops him with a jab in round 1. It was a little bit patient in round 1. It was mainly, Burns wasn't swinging as much in round 1. He was sort of leg kicking a bit more and going to the body with some kicks and just sort of like trying to move away and get out of that first round against Khamzat Chimaev. And then round 2, he went off on Khamzat Chimaev and Chimaev came right back. And then round 3 started off really, really good. And it was Chimaev hurting Gilbert Burns and Burns swinging back and landing really, really big shots on the chin of Chimaev. And then in like the last 2 minutes, it kind of died down again. So, yeah, really, really good fight. Top of B tier for sure. Better than Holland Wonderboy. Better than Onama versus Landwehr. But just not quite that A tier level of Vera versus... In fact, I'm going to put Vera versus Font below Peterson versus Arosa because it really was crazy. But yeah, it's not quite that A-tier level. But Khamzat versus Burns was wicked. It was a sick fight. Really, really good fight. But yeah, because it was Khamzat versus Burns is why people consider it maybe a fight of the year candidate. But if they were any other people, it would be at B tier. So that's what I'm trying to do this list on. But yeah, that was B tier for sure. Really, really solid fight. Really, really fun. Really, really fun. We move on. Matt Brown, Brian Barberena. I'm not going to say much about it. It's just a fight that needs to be mentioned this year. A consistently fun fight for 3 rounds. If you want to watch like a fun fight this year that you maybe didn't see because it flew under the radar, I think this was on the prelims. Maybe on the main card. Yeah, you might have forgot about this one, so I just thought I'd put it in. It was a really fun fight over 3 rounds. Matt Brown was getting hit with elbows, and he was landing elbows back, and I think, what was it, Matt Brown landing a bunch of really hard body kicks on Brian Barberena, and then Barberena would swing right back and rock Matt Brown. It was just slightly better than Brian Barberena versus Robbie Lawler, which I was considering putting on this list. But this was slightly better. Matt Brown, Brian Barberena. A 3-round slugfest scrap with 2 OG vets of the game. Not so much Barberena, but he is a veteran at this point. But Matt Brown, of course, is a real veteran of the game. And it was just a really, really fun scrap. If you want to watch a fun Matt Brown fight, Matt Brown versus Brian Barberena, go and watch it, because it really was a sick fight. We move on. Poirier versus Chandler. I'm putting it at the bottom of C tier. I think it's an overrated fight, and I think people that say it's one of the best fights of the year are just chatting waffle. It was a really good first round, and then Chandler just sort of took top control in round 2 and held top control. Landed a couple ground and pound shots. You know what I mean? Like, it was a really good first round. Round of the year, make the argument if you want. I don't think it's a round of the year, but it's one of them, for sure. Top 5. It's A tier for round of the year. Let's say that. But round 2 was dead. And round 3 was kind of dead as well. Like, it's just... I think it was really overrated because Poirier and Chandler are really big names. I think Chandler Gaethje was kind of overrated. Now, it was a really good fight, and Poirier-Chandler was a really good fight, but people, like, just because it's those names, they put it at, like, A tier. Oh, this was the greatest fight of the year by far, but I'm like, dude, there were so many fights better than that one. You know what I mean? I'll put it this way. Round 3 of Gane versus Tuivasa was more fun than round 2 or 3 of Chandler versus Poirier. And both of their great rounds were similar to each other in terms of entertainment. Like, round 2 of Gane Tuivasa was like round 1 of Poirier versus Chandler. But Poirier-Chandler round 2 and 3 were like nothing like round 3 of Gane versus Tuivasa, which was still really fun. So, yeah, I'm going to put this one at C tier. But it's at the bottom of C tier. Above some of the D tier fights, which are still really, really good scraps because round 1 was that good. But yeah, round 2 was just not so great. Round 3, there was a finish, always good. Finish, rear naked choke, great moment. But it was more just on, oh, Chandler, you fucking idiot. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh my god, Poirier has somehow pulled it off. It was more like, what the fuck are you doing, Chandler, you spaz? You know what I mean? So that kind of overwhelmed the shock factor of the fight. It was more just like a letdown from Chandler's IQ once again. So really, really great first round, but the second and third kind of lets it down from being a B tier or an A tier fight. If it had another great round, like round 2 was as good as round 1 or even anywhere close, I would have put it at B tier, but wasn't the case. Kind of got dead after round 1. We move on to S tier. The greatest fight of the year, Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira. No question. No question. There's just no question about it. It had everything. Absolutely everything. It's the best thing that's possible that isn't a 5-round fight when it comes to fight of the year candidate. A last second finish. Rear naked choke. Glover was knocking down Yuri, and Yuri submitted Glover. Mental fight. Round 1 was crazy because Yuri was teeing off in moments, but then Glover would get a takedown and start raining down big shots on Yuri, and Yuri would get out of it and find his way back up on his feet and start landing really big shots again of his own, but then end up on the ground again, and Glover's landing really big shots of ground and pound again. And then round 2, Yuri hurts Glover on the feet, starts ripping the body against a cage and landing big shots on the feet, and it looks like Glover's going to be done. But then Yuri goes for like a sub and ends up on bottom, and Glover's on top, and big shots from Glover. Like, even the grappling moments weren't dead in the fight. But there's more to it than that. I think Yuri was hurting Glover badly on the feet in round 2. And then Glover, I think, caught Yuri with a punch that hurt him as Yuri went for like a jump knee against a cage. And Yuri ended up on the ground at the end of round 2. And Glover's back on top and he elbows him and cuts open Yuri's eye. Then round 3 comes around. Yuri's teeing off on Glover again. Glover's having a bit more success, but Yuri's teeing off on Glover. And Glover gets a takedown and Yuri reverses it and ends up on top and starts mashing up Glover with ground and pound in round 3. Landing really, really big shots on Glover. And just sort of like doing really well. Really big ground and pound shots. But then I think at one point he went for like a arm triangle. And it was nearly in on Glover. And then he fell off. And Glover came on top at the end and landed some big shots there as well. Round 4. Yuri's going at him. Swinging, landing really good shots. Glover's having more success on the feet now as well. What happened in round 4 that was crazy? Oh my god. Glover gets him down. Beats him up on the ground for like a solid minute. Yuri survives, but Glover goes for an arm triangle. Yuri connects his hands together, rolls backwards using the leverage of his hands being pulled together, and finds his way out of the arm triangle. And now he's on top at the end of round 4, landing massive ground and pound shots on Glover. And it was just non-stop. Oh my god, Glover's going to do it. Oh my god, Yuri's going to do it. And then Glover was edging that because he was the one on top position a lot more of the time. And then round 5. Both guys landing good shots. Yuri doing good, but he's a bit more reckless because he's tired. Glover clips him bad, hurts him really badly, chasing down Yuri, boom, 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 goes for the guillotine, is it in? He slips out of the guillotine, Yuri lets him back up like a nonce, and then boom, boom, Yuri's landing more shots, Glover's landing more shots back on Yuri, and then Yuri goes in for another barrage. Glover takes him down, I believe. He's winning the fight, he's landing ground and pound shots, and then Yuri kicks off the cage. 30 seconds left, I want to say. 40 seconds left. Reverses position. Ends up on top in side control. Big shots from Yuri. Big elbows. Going for crucifix position. Glover rolls over to give up his back a bit. Rear naked choke is in. No hooks needed. Subs him with like 20 seconds to go. Craziest fight of the year for sure. And it was for a title. Like, you can't take that away from it. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye. Those were the fights of the year. Let me know if I forgot anyone. I don't think I did. I'm just going to scout around the corner of the screen here just to see if I've missed any fights. But no, I haven't. I've got them all. Very good fights this year. Hopefully 2023 brings us some more. Toodle pip. Goodbye.